All these people saw him, could have done something. No one did anything. They just didn't want to get him in trouble. Well, instead, he's dead. So what good did that do? So the sheath was seen instantly. Good to know. Hey guys, this is Jules with True Crime Reactions. Disclaimer, everything stated in this video is my opinion and my opinion only. And just like everything else in these cases we discuss here on this channel, everything is alleged. Okay, so I got the book in. It came in. If you missed my introduction episode, it looks like this. There will be a link for it down in the description box. I'm going to be doing this in sections so that we can get all of the information that we possibly can and dissect it down, compare the information in this to the information that we've been told so far, to the court documents, to the things that we've heard in the court hearings, all of the things. This video is going to be the prologue. The prologue is 3 chapters, and it helps sort of lay out the timeline for a certain amount of things. Now, it was kind of difficult to figure out until you get to chapter 3 of the prologue, because it starts off saying that James Fry is getting a phone call on November 13th from Captain Tyson Barrett about the situation. But then whenever it goes on to chapter 2, it just says 1 hour later and doesn't really give you any timestamps literally at all. I don't even think it gives you the time of the 911 call coming in yet. But then on chapter 3, it says 2 hours earlier, and it's at 1122 King Road. And this is where Officer Nunez, who was the literal first on scene, I didn't know that he was like the youngest on the police force. I can imagine he probably feels all kinds of like effed up in the head after seeing all that stuff. But it starts out on chapter 3 with Nunez reaching Sergeant Shane Gunderson, talking about what's going on and telling him, hey, this is serious. And Gunderson getting up and getting in his car and getting down to King Road. And then it talks about calling Tyson Barrett and doing all the things and all the other things. So the best that I can sort of figure out here is that since we know noonish is whenever the cops would have gotten there, I would assume that the phone call to Chief Fry would have been before 2 p.m. Maybe something like that, because I feel like some time probably went by, because Chief Fry doesn't ever want to like get in the way from how it sounds. That he knows that his job is to like make sure that he's delegating properly, because other people are supposed to do certain things, and he just needs to be in the back end for support and making sure that they have everything that they need. So he would have been like one of the last calls that honestly needed to be made in the first place. And I understand that after reading this. But it starts out again with Chief Fry getting a phone call from Captain Tyson Barrett. He's already on his way back from this Wenatchee, Washington area with his wife, Julie Fry. She was the newly elected Latah County clerk, which a lot of people were questioning that for a long time. And I know that it sounds odd, but I even mentioned, hey, this is a small town. Everyone knows everyone. Everyone went to school with everyone. Everyone's married to everyone. Everyone's families are intertwined somehow. So it's really not abnormal for that situation. I mean, look at the stuff over in Letcher County. Look at all those connections and stuff there. That's pretty wild. It goes on to say that Fry's been an officer for like 30-ish years, and that this was nowhere near the first time that he's experienced any sort of homicide case, that he's actually dealt with quite a few. It doesn't lay out every single one of them, but it starts off 18 years ago in 2007, the year Ariel was born. Okay, that's a long time ago. Whenever he was a sergeant, he worked 3 in just 1 year, and one of them actually involved a University of Idaho student named David Boss, who was pew-pewed by a former classmate. It doesn't mention the other 2 from 2007, but then it jumps to 2011 whenever he was a lieutenant, and he oversaw the investigation of a different university tragedy. Well, it says another university tragedy, and then it goes on to describe how a man named Ernesto Bustamante, who had a history of mental illness, that was a psychology professor, pew-pewed a woman named Katie Benoit that was a 22-year-old grad student that he'd been previously dating. He did this outside of her home and then later turned the weapon on himself and self-deleted. It goes on to say how he knew just from the very beginning of the phone call that this was going to be too big for Moscow to be able to handle, and that he knew that his role today was to stay close in touch with his officers, but he knew that he needed to stay out of the way. He then asks if Bill Thompson has been notified. It goes on to talk about how Thompson has never lost a case, and that him and Fry meet up every single day at 8 o'clock in the morning, and that the main reason why Chief Fry believes so much in Bill Thompson is because he's the only prosecutor in Idaho who has ever won a murder conviction with no body. Okay, I'm really trying to find the case that they're talking about here. I'm assuming it's a case in Idaho by the verbiage. I could have that incorrect. I'm not sure anymore because I've tried to look for a while now and can't find anything. But look at this. Microsoft Bing, when I type in Idaho first murder conviction with no body found, it literally gives me this weird crap. Bryan Kohberger was convicted of willful murder for killing Karen, Carron, and executed in 1932. I'm sorry, what are you talking about? So if we click it and we open it, it goes here. Why does it go here? Now let's go Control F and type in Idaho. Nothing. Literally at all. Type in Kohberger. Nothing. Nothing. Carron. Is that here? Okay, so here, see, okay. So this has Lewis Karen was the victim. John Rouse was convicted. And it says that this was the final victim of the Murchison murders, in which John Rouse used a body disposal method that had been suggested by author Arthur Upfield. That's a mouthful. Arthur. Okay. However, Rouse had forgotten to complete one of the steps after Karen's murder. He was convicted of willful murder for killing Karen and executed. Okay, so this is about this John Rouse person, but for some reason it's trying to act as if, Bing is trying to act as if this has something to do with Bryan Kohberger. I cannot believe how stupid AI is. Anyway, again, I'm trying to find this exact case that's being discussed. So I go to this page, and it's the same page it already took me to, because this is just a Wikipedia page, which is honestly useless because it's publicly done. As you can see, it's really difficult to try to find anything. It's basically all going back to everything that has to do with Bill Thompson and Kohberger's case. So I'm going to have to do a little bit more digging. I don't know if he's ever been a prosecutor in any other state, but I personally, at the time of me doing this book review, cannot find the case that they're discussing. So if you happen to know which one it is, please let me know down in the comments. I don't feel like I knew that before. That's actually pretty crazy. So then it talks about how Lawrence Mowry and Andrew Fox from forensics are also on the way. They've contacted the state. And they also talk about how Mitch Nunez was the first officer on the scene. The body cam. I would really like to see the body cam and the initial report, because that's where all of the truth is going to come from. That's what would have been played at the trial. The first responding officer's information. But this is pretty crazy, because he does say that he instantly felt like his heart break because Nunez was only 22 years old. He was literally the youngest officer. That is really sad. That's really young to have to deal with something in your face like that. Okay, so the Paul Kwiatkowski person that's mentioned in the intro episode and the thank yous and stuff in the beginning of the book is Fry's longtime ride-along partner and best friend. They then go on to talk about how the university has already been notified and that Brett Payne is on his way. It goes on to also state that, for the people that didn't already know this situation, Brett Payne started working for the Moscow Police Department in 2020, so just 2 years before this whole situation. 2 months prior to this, Brett Payne was promoted to a position that was created specifically for him, which would be detective corporal. And then it goes on to say how Fry basically states that the situation with George Floyd is the reason why they didn't have a lot of police officers. And they were shorthanded, basically, and he's blaming it on that situation. He decided to take the sergeants out the field and put them in administrative positions so they could learn how to pay bills and budget and run a department. So he took people with experience completely out of the field to do admin work, and then created a position and put a basic rookie in that position. And then he says, Fry realizes Payne will be the one to lead this investigation. You could have literally been like, hold up, homeboy. This isn't for you. This is not the right time for you to be in this position. I'm pulling these sergeants out of admin and putting them where they belong. I mean, seriously, the university used Brett Payne's inability and like lack of knowledge to be able to lead this investigation on the reason why they like mainly took over everything. And then some of you might remember, some of you might not. I told you guys after the hearing on July 2nd was over about the information that was sent to me about how Brett Payne was no longer working for Moscow Police Department. And the email was written and forwarded back in April, the end of April. I knew at the beginning of May. And that he not only was not working for Moscow anymore, but that he was going to be moving over to a job at the University of Idaho. So the same university that felt that he was inadequate then hired him because suddenly he's adequate? It just doesn't really make a lot of sense. Anyway, it goes on to also state, yes, that Payne had been contacted, but that he wasn't going to be there until around 4 p.m. I don't know if they ever mentioned why it took that long. I'm going to have to go back into the documents and see, or somebody, if you guys remember, if it was ever talked about why it took that long for him to get there. I don't remember what the reasoning was, if we were ever told. So then it says that Chief Fry then calls the local therapist, Dr. Rand Walker. He's also mentioned in the thank yous in the beginning of the book, and tells him he's going to need to be on standby because some crazy stuff's going on. Gary Jenkins, the chief over at WSU, calls him and basically says, hey, do you need our help? Because the two departments tag team quite a bit. As a matter of fact, Moscow's last convicted, John Lee, had been caught on the run by officers in Pullman, which is interesting. I mean, yeah, we've known actually for a while that they work together. But Fry didn't want to just let anybody in the mama know information. So at this point in time, he told WSU, no, we don't want any help right now. And that he knew that that's how Bill Thompson would have wanted it, because Bill Thompson doesn't talk about anything either, at least not until after there's a sentencing situation. And even then, he doesn't really say much. And then at the bottom of page 6, it says that Barrett shared with Chief Fry that the knife sheath had been found in one of the rooms and that it was imperative that this information did not get out. And they really did keep it quiet. But did the families know? That's one question I don't think we know the answer to. Unless it's been answered by one person in the families and we missed it, or I missed it, or it's just, in all of the discombobulation out there. But I don't remember any of the families ever stating that they were told that anything like that was found. The majority didn't know until we did, whenever the PCA came out. Okay, so then we are on to number 2, where it goes to an hour later. But honestly, it's just a bunch of stuff about Chief Fry's past, some of the cases that he worked on. And honestly, the one about Joseph Wiederrick is really, really sad. And I can see exactly why a lot of people think that it's really just as simple as it's university related. Nobody wanted to get anybody in trouble, and that's why no one called the cops, because what if it wasn't a big deal? What if it wasn't what we thought it was and people get in trouble for no reason? Because that's basically the situation with this Joseph Wiederrick kid. Like, I'll run down like the little timeline or whatever, because he had proof after his investigation that several people could have helped this guy, and instead they turned him away under the guise of, we just didn't want to call the cops, like just turned a blind eye type thing. But in reality, they all could have saved his life. Even if he would have ended up going to jail that night and getting cited for being drunk and walking around, he would still be alive. And instead, he was found frozen to death days after he originally disappeared. It's really, really sad. So then it goes on to state that on January 20th, 2013, a woman hears noise in her downstairs basement. It's Joseph. He's basically mumbling, safe, safe. So I'm questioning, was he running from someone? Was he trying to get away from someone? Or was he just trying to get safe from the cold because he knew he didn't have long, like he knew he couldn't really be out there because he was drunk and like incapable of surviving it. But instead of calling the cops or getting someone's phone number out of his phone for him or trying to do anything to help him, she just asks him to leave. Personally, I would have called the cops regardless because it's the middle of the night and you just broke into my basement and scared the ever-living poop out of me, and now I'm awake and freaking out. I would have just instantly called the cops. But this says no. She makes him go. It's completely black outside and it's snowing, and because students often do this and it's just like a nuisance that people ignore, no one bothered to do anything. This was around, again, 2:00 in the morning. An hour later, he's knocking on another person's door. The owner looks out the window and just says, "Go home," and doesn't bother calling the cops, letting him in out the snow or anything like that. And at this point, it says, the townsfolk think they're protecting them. I don't like this. I don't like it at all. 4 a.m., bang, bang, on another person's house. They look outside, don't say anything. So then Joseph wanders away. He's trying to get back to his dorm, but has no idea which direction he's going, has no idea what he's doing. He's too out of his mind. And then apparently he ends up near Paradise Creek, which is 2 miles north of the city. He trips and falls. He goes into the frozen creek and he goes down to the bottom, but he fights and he's able to get out. But now he's soaking wet in this horribly, disgustingly cold, snowy, dark weather. So he ends up going and crawling underneath a nearby bridge, and that's where he passes away. He freezes to death. His body was discovered by police 2 days later. The last time he was seen was that Saturday night at a party at the Sigma Alpha Epsilon fraternity. All these people saw him, could have done something. No one did anything. They just didn't want to get him in trouble. Well, instead, he's dead. So what good did that do? So then it gets to 3, where it goes 2 hours earlier. And this would be, again, whenever Officer Nunez, who was the first on scene, is now calling the police station and telling Sergeant Shane Gunderson, get down here because everything is wrong. And again, they phoned Tyson Barrett. And then Barrett said that he also sent out Smith and Warner. Now, I remember the name Smith, but I don't remember the name Warner. But they were sent to help tape off the house. But it also goes on to talk again about how he has an affiliation with the school. His daughter is also a student there. And remember, it mentioned earlier that he knew Ava and Emily because of the football stadium or the stadium dome place. As soon as he got there, he recognized Ava. And he asked her if she knew the people inside, and she just nodded. She didn't say anything. She just nodded. So then he starts going through all the checks in his head about what he needs to do. But when it gets to number 2 for call for medical assistance, it just says there's no need. Damn. Okay. Then it says all of the detectives that were called in is John Lawrence, who's about to retire, Danny Vargas, Brett Payne, and then, of course, Lawrence Mowry, and then Andrew Fox. Talks about notifying Chief Fry, Bill Thompson, Anthony Dallinger, Roger Lanier, and then calling the people that are in charge over at the Idaho State Police to get in there and start helping them, to contact the university, to get a hold of the coroner, to tell the public that there is a threat. Because at this point, they had no idea if there really was or wasn't. And then he goes on to say how Barrett knows from experience that there's a connection somewhere between whoever did this and at least one of the victims. There always is. But that's not technically true. I mean, regardless of the fact that we haven't been told an actual validated connection at all, as a matter of fact, everything in the court hearings, everything in the documents when it comes to social media, when it comes to all of the devices, there's no connection between Bryan Kohberger and that house. There's no connection between Bryan Kohberger and the residents of 1122 King Road. There's no connections at all, whether on social media or in physical reality. This is a very confusing case, but regardless of all of those things, the Gainesville Ripper was just a random psychopath. There was no connections whatsoever between him and his victims. They were completely and utterly random. So no, that's That's not always the case, but this is a very dramatic almost ending to this, because it says right here, as the patrol officers began talking to the people sitting outside the house, the very first thought was, why is this young student, Hunter Johnson, holding a kitchen knife? What happened here? But then at this point, Hunter sits down with the officers, they talk to him, and then he's free to go. And then goes on to talk about how the medical responders to the 911 call showed up, only stayed a couple of minutes, and then at the cops' request were asked to leave. But that's pretty much it. So, yeah, I guess it is sort of interesting that Hunter was still holding on to that knife, like outside. I guess maybe maybe it was smart to hold on to it instead of leaving it inside and then having to explain it later. But then again, considering everything that we don't know here, do we actually know if he grabbed it whenever he walked in, or was it taken out for other reasons? Do we know what kind of knife it actually was? I know it says kitchen knife, but it is odd, considering. So I don't know. But it was interesting so far. Knowing about the sheath means, honestly, because they're not allowed to really move them until the coroner gets there. And at this point, they're noticing the knife sheath before she has arrived, before Mabbitt has arrived. So either they broke protocol and moved Maddie and was able to see it, or it wasn't really underneath covers and underneath her body or any of those things. Because again, if it was under covers and underneath her leg on that certain side, I can't off the top of my head remember exactly how they worded it, but they mentioned there were being blankets and other things. So did they move her? And that's how they saw it? Or was it really not covered up the way that they're telling us? See, all of these discrepancies? I mean, that's what they are at this point, guys. It's not me trying to like nitpick and say, oh, this is wrong and this is wrong and this is wrong. You think I want to be able to see all of the inconsistencies? I'm taking all of the information that they're actually giving us and trying to piece it together, but it's not my fault, your fault, or anyone else's fault but their own. That the stuff don't match. The puzzle pieces don't fit. So the next portion is part 1, the innocence. And this is, how many chapters is this? This goes to chapter 18, and then part 2, titled Inception, starts at chapter 19. I'll probably do this in 2 parts. So again, if you missed the preview episode, that one looks like this. Be watching for the next portion. Make sure your notification bells are set to all. And if you like the way that I present this information and give my opinion, please don't forget to leave a like on your way out. Subscribe to the channel if you have not subscribed already. And please don't forget to make sure, once again, that notification bell is set to all, so you don't miss any of my rants, reviews, reactions, updates, or deep dives. See y'all.